Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Fraser Jackson. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent this evening. Uganda's parliament passes an anti-LGBTQ+ law in the country, which could see anyone publicly identifying as queer face 10 years in prison. This in a country where homosexuality was already illegal. As Burkina Faso's military junta brings in a new law aimed at protecting detainees' rights, we'll speak to NGO Human Rights Watch about the changes. And also in Burkina Faso, we'll show you the environmentally minded golf course that is saving water by switching its greens for browns. Thanks for being with us this evening. Uganda's parliament has passed a strict anti-LGBTQ+ law in a country where homosexuality is already illegal. The bill means anyone who engages in same-sex activity or even publicly identifies as queer could face up to 10 years in prison. Our regional correspondent Clément de Roma tells us more.
The Ugandan parliament was packed and hundreds of MPs made speeches over the course of 6 hours, all in favour of the new law dubbed the anti-homosexuality bill before its final adoption. Since January, a new wave of anti-LGBTQ+ hatred has been shaking up the country, stemming from a criminal case of pedophilia in a school. This new law says Ugandans can face up to 10 years in prison for acts interpreted as homosexual by law. It also condemns the simple fact of identifying and declaring oneself as being LGBTQ+. Another vague point, the sanctioning of the promotion of homosexuality, which could target human rights NGOs, since they sometimes receive aid from certain foreign countries, which the Ugandan government does not approve. The activists are for the moment discreet, but are not afraid of the risks of arrests and violence after this vote. On March 18th, 6 Ugandan men were arrested for practicing homosexuality one day after President Museveni declared LGBTQ people as deviant. Similar laws had been voted on in 2014, 2019 and 2021, but either the President or the Constitutional Court had always prevented their application. We do not yet know if this will be the case for this new bill.
Clément de Roma for us there. Let's move to Burkina Faso, where the military junta ruling the country is bringing in a new law aimed at protecting the rights of detainees and discipline of the armed forces. Article 241 will see the role of the so-called provost marshals given the same rights as military policemen, significantly increasing their scope and power. Well, joining me now is Karine Kaneza Nantulia. She's the Deputy Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. She joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. Your organisation, Human Rights Watch, has welcomed this new law. What changes will this new law bring, and what's the significance of those changes?
I think we welcomed this new law because the first thing is it was passed in the context of Burkina Faso's security situation remaining precarious. Attacks by armed Islamist groups on civilians have really surged since 2022, while state security forces and pro-government armed groups have conducted a number of abusive counterterrorism operations, which we documented. So that is the first point. The second point is that provost marshals who were already operating have been now afforded the possibility to operate in all cases during deployment of soldiers on military operations. The previous restrictions that they were undermine their core functions of protecting detainees' rights and reducing abuses. And it's a positive step in terms of ensuring that the armed forces will respect basic rights in military operations and detainees are treated humanly and afforded due process before the law. It's also important to recognize that the 68 parliamentarians who voted for the bill did so unanimously.
Historically, what's Burkina Faso's human rights record been like when it comes to detainees?
As I mentioned, we have, in the course of the last 3 to 4, 5 years, Human Rights Watch has regularly reported on abuses committed, whether during counterterrorism operations or even in retaliation when members of security forces have been killed by armed Islamist groups and those they deem sympathizers or complicit with the armed Islamist groups.
Is this law something that then is a homegrown initiative, or do you think it's been put in place to appease international onlookers?
This is a law we've been long advocated for. We believe that ultimately the national defense responsibilities is owned by the government, and we believe that ultimately this is a transitional parliament that passed the law. So we should see this as a homegrown, but we also should recognize that the government, alongside other partners and stakeholders, is cognizant of how dire the human rights and humanitarian situation is at this time.
Mrs. Karine Kaneza-Nantuya, thank you so much for that update there. Thank you for speaking to us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's take a look at some other stories making headlines across the continent this evening. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday, with the pair vowing to step up contacts with African nations. The growing Chinese and Russian influence on the continent has been a thorn in the side of Western powers, as they've seen their influence slip following security and infrastructure contracts offered by Moscow and Beijing. After 2 years in captivity in Mali, French journalist Olivier Dubois is finally back on French soil. Having landed at an airbase near Paris, the 48-year-old was reunited with his wife, 2 children, sister and father. Dubois had been kidnapped by an Al-Qaeda-linked group in northern Mali and said that over the 2 years there had been some tough moments, but that he was not mistreated, humiliated or hit. Dubois said he had not received answers on how his release had been achieved, whether that be a prisoner swap, money or both. All he knew was that Niger was implicated, as was the French intelligence service. And Nigerian opposition candidate Peter Obi has filed a petition for the results of the country's recent presidential election to be annulled. The move is set to kick off a months-long legal campaign in which Obi accuses the country's electoral commission of breaking the law by failing to use electronic machines to upload polling results. The recent vote was won by Bola Tinubu, who has defended the validity of the elections. Later on Monday, Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko live-streamed a video from his hospital bed claiming to have survived an assassination attempt. Law enforcement sprayed Mr. Sonko with his entourage with gas while they were on their way to the courthouse last week. The opposition leader had been due to stand a politically charged trial for defamation. Well, since the incident, which led to deadly unrest and hundreds of arrests, Mr. Sonko has complained of dizziness, breathing difficulties and abdominal pain. Sam Bradpiece has more for us from Dakar.
The accusation from Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko is remarkable. He claims to have survived an assassination attempt, insinuating that the product used to spray him was far stronger than mere tear gas.
We still don't know exactly what this product was, but the doctors have their suspicions. My clothes have been sent out of the country for analysis because, unfortunately, we've been told they can't do it in Senegal.
The Senegalese government, however, denies all accusations of foul play.
This is not the first crazy, surprising and contentious declaration from Mr. Sonko. He's a liar, adept at victimization and violence.
On March 30th, Mr. Sonko will appear in court again, and a judge will rule on his defamation case. If found guilty, he will be disqualified from taking part in next year's presidential election.
And finally, from greens to browns, an eco-friendly golf course in Burkina Faso has ditched the typical field of play for something more sustainable in the drought-stricken country. Lauren Burstershire tees off with this report.
In the arid landscape surrounding Burkina Faso's capital, Two yellow-clad silhouettes slowly drag their bags in the crushing heat. They're headed to the Ouagadougou Golf Club, an 18-hole course certified by the French Federation that traded its green for a brown made of sand and motor oil.
Burkina
Faso is a country that needs water. Golf is already criticised as a sport for the rich, so if we started pouring water to try to grow some grass, I don't think we'd be allowed to play here.
A course this size normally consumes around 5,000 cubic meters of water a day, the equivalent of a town of 12,000 people. But in drought-stricken Burkina Faso, growing grass in the middle of the desert is out of the question. The only way to play in this arid climate is to give up on the green. For these golfers, the unusual terrain is but another handicap. Some even relish the added challenge.
There are many unexpected things. You can hit a ball and then it hits a rock. It changes the trajectory, but it's also part of the game. This is also what makes the Ouagadougou route a bit atypical.
Golf is considered one of the world's most polluting sports, largely because of its high water consumption. But the Ouagadougou Golf Club wants to show it's possible to practice your putting and drive while respecting the environment.
I'm sure they're still a lot better than I am. That's it for now. Stay tuned for France 24. More news coming up next.